Hey everyone, I'm excited to share my key takeaways from preparing for the Microsoft Azure AI 102 certification. I'll walk you through what I learnt during the process, plus some additional insights I've picked up since earning the certification. As you know, AI is evolving rapidly, with new advancements emerging all the time. In the session, I'll cover what Azure AI is and how it fits into the broader Azure ecosystem, the range of AI services available and how to get started, deploying AI resources efficiently, and how AI Studio's visual interface can help you explore and leverage these tools. And of course, I'll share some ideas on how this can bring value to your clients. So, here's a bit of a declarative statement, but I think that Azure AI is central to a future of scalable and intelligent solutions. So, AI certainly isn't the be all and end all, but I think it will certainly complement the existing range of solutions and also offer us avenues to do things that we haven't done before. And this is certainly how Microsoft is positioning themselves within this ecosystem with all of their offerings within Azure AI. Azure AI is just a suite of cloud services and tools that enable businesses to integrate AI into their applications without needing deep ML expertise. This was one of the real barriers to entry with AI before this sort of current era that we're seeing here. To train and to deploy AI tools required a really deep knowledge of ML and how it worked. I know this from working with a solution that used one of these ML implementations back maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, and it was very, very complex to get started, and you had to really, really know what you were doing in this space. But what I think has happened over the last couple of years, and particularly over the last 6 months, is these companies, OpenAI has been a real leader in this space, and Microsoft is working with them very heavily, but they've made it really easy to get started with AI here, and that's sort of what is behind a lot of is in Azure AI. So different components of Azure AI are the pre-built models, and these pre-built models are fantastic. They know how to analyze exactly what we'll be analyzing. So this is great for images, speech, language, and the like here. It also gives us access to that more complex custom AI where we're building and training our own models. And then also that big advent in the last sort of year here is the generative AI. So as I mentioned before, Microsoft has partnered with OpenAI, and all of their major models are on offer, and we can utilize them in a number of different ways. Azure AI is also designed to integrate directly into the Azure ecosystem, and we can see this in a number of different ways. Sometimes for these tools to actually function, we need to have existing Azure infrastructure there. And this can include things like blob storage there. So a couple of different thoughts I had around this were how we ingest and store data for our AI applications, and this will use the data lake, blob storage, or if you're using sort of sensors and the like, the IoT hub. It's really useful and integrates with the search and knowledge mining, and it's sort of integral as part of the Azure Cognitive Search. Automation and integration. As many of us know, Microsoft are really positioning themselves heavily behind tools like Power Automate, and Azure AI fits directly into what we're working with here. And for the developers as well, the Logic apps and the Azure functions as well, they can integrate directly with these AI solutions. Security and governance. So, like all of the other tools, other services that are available within Azure, it connects directly to things like the Azure security and the role-based access control. These services can connect just like any other with service accounts that have role-based access control. And Microsoft is very insistent, and this was clear with both the learning and the certification exam there, that they're very, very focused on the responsible use of AI. So there's a number of pillars to responsible AI use. This is essentially just treating everybody as equals and making sure that we don't take any pre-existing biases into what we're doing with AI, and also some concerns around security and the like here. So without special permissions, there's a number of tools you still can't use that are on offer within the Azure AI ecosystem. So things like facial recognition and the storage of facial data and things like that are very restricted. And also things like people recognition within AI tools. I don't know if you've even tried within any of the OpenAI offerings, but if you try to identify people from pictures, it's something where there's a bit of a block that is in place there. And then end-to-end insights, and this is something that I'd get very excited about, but many of the outputs that we create from these AI solutions can be fed directly into Power BI and also the Azure Monitor for analytics and decision making here. So it's really a big play, and they're positioning the AI components to be central and very much like a lot of the other offerings, and to integrate with a lot of the existing offerings that we have here as well. These four sort of buckets are a great way to sort of think about all of these different tools. They probably fit into one of these four categories. So as I was mentioning, these are language, visual perception, speech, and decision making. And as I was saying, what we're attempting to do with AI is to take human-like reasoning abilities and apply them to sort of non-human problems, or problems that could have possibly been done by a human, but can be optimized by using machines to do so. So below, I've got a bit of a list of the services themselves. Now, these services aren't the be-all and end-all. Each of these different services here can have many, many different facets to them. And I'll sort of explain them as I go through what we sort of study here. And again, one of the reasons that study for this exam was so hard is because we had to have an understanding of how each of these worked and how they integrated and could be implemented into solutions. So first is the Azure AI agent service, and this is one that's up and coming and has a lot of development behind it at the moment. So this is using the power of generative AI models with tools to access and interact independently with real-world data. We've got model inference. So essentially what this is saying is model inference is when we take a pre-existing model, and you might have seen in my BR chat a lot about the models that are coming out at the moment. We've obviously got all of the OpenAI models, of which O3 Mini was released very recently, but then we've got other things like the new DeepSeek model is also a model that we can use within Azure AI here. So what this is doing is taking an existing model and then applying it over new data to come up with intelligent solutions here. One of the really big offerings, a really powerful offering, is Azure AI Search. It was previously called Cognitive Search. And so what this is essentially is building really complex indices over large sort of data sets. This can include the data that we're used to looking at. So things like, databases and things like, JSON outputs. And then we can also put in full documents into here, code snippets, all sorts of different things can be cataloged within Azure AI Search. And there's also a lot of functionality in terms of skills within there as well. Azure OpenAI is sort of our pathway into using what OpenAI has on offer for those sort of generative solutions to sort of solve natural language tasks. We've got the bot service. This one's gone through a few different iterations in its lifetime, but this is essentially to create bots and connect them across the channels that we have within Azure. Content safety is a really interesting one. And so this is sort of an AI service that can help flag inappropriate content. This is particularly useful when you've got sort of user-generated content that's coming in. And this can be used over both a visual layer and also over things like text. And there's different controls we have over the level of safety we want. So you could make something like child safe, or you could make it, safe for general consumption and the like as well. I'll talk about custom vision in a little bit as it's sort of an offshoot of the vision model itself. But document intelligence is a really, really powerful feature, and we'll be having a look at the Document Intelligence Studio a little bit later in this presentation. So what this allows us to do is to take physical documents and to basically build models, so either use pre-existing models for sort of common sort of documents that we find. This can include things like receipts and pay slips, this sort of information, or it could use sort of custom documents. So one thing that I mentioned a little bit further down the line in this presentation is, maybe there's a space for us to turn some of the physical documents that the companies like Keaton are using, and then using intelligent solutions to sort of build a custom model to read that information and to really make that process a lot more efficient in terms of reading and storing that data and then connecting it things with like AI search here. There's also the face model. Again, this is sort of a subset of the vision set, but there's an incredibly complex output that we can get regarding the detection of faces, the detection of landmarks on faces. So where someone's eye sits, in comparison to their nose, for example, to identify different people and also to identify their emotions and their sort of sentiment in images here as well. The immersive reader is a really interesting one in terms of making things more accessible. This is an AI-enabled solution that assists people who are maybe differently abled to read and comprehend the text and content that's on a page here. Language is, again, one of those really, really broad topics here. But essentially, the language service deals with everything in terms of understanding what is attempted to be said in a string or a set of text, and then using features like entity identification. So identifying people, places, things, concepts from what's being said. It's really useful at summarizing information and also detecting things like sentiment, as I've mentioned with the face API here before as well. Speech is another whole rabbit hole here. So there's many, many different options we have in terms of speech. So this can be speech to text, text to speech, translation, speaker recognition, again, sentiment analysis. And then you can use, once all of that speech has been turned into text, then you could use the language models to help you understand more about sort of those key concepts or the sentiment that's applied here as well. So the translator is a subset of the language model here, and it's really useful and natural way to translate language into both those commonly used languages, so your sort of English, Spanish, Arabic, French, these sorts of things here, as well as then maybe some more at risk and even some fun languages in there. Like I know if you're a bit of a Trekkie, they've got a Klingon translator service as well, so you could use things like that. The video indexer is sort of an out-of-the-box solution that's been built, which takes a number of the different elements of what we're looking at here and builds an all-in-one solution that allows users to go through a video, understand the key concepts, understand the sentiment, do live transcription of that, and then also sort of provide live subtitles in a number of different languages. And as I've mentioned before, vision is everything that is dealing with what you see in an image. And this breaks down into many, many further categories as well, such as person recognition, identifying objects within images, identifying what sort of image we're looking at, and then classifying that image. And then also things like object detection, which is used in things like, if you've got a sort of a modern car, you'd see that we're sort of detecting, when you've got objects in front of you, the distance to those objects and the like there. So again, there's many, many different offerings here. So it can seem a little bit overwhelming, but luckily it is easy to get started if you're familiar with the Azure environment. These services are built like any other within the Azure environment. Now, I wasn't particularly familiar with it. I think before I'd sort of started working with this, the most I've been exposed to Azure was through things like sort of blob storage and then adding people to groups. So this certification was a really good opportunity for me to get exposed to many of the different offerings, then also how to analyze things like spend here. I think if you don't take control of these can be very, very sort of taxing in terms of compute. But if you're familiar with Azure AI or with Azure, it's really simple to get started. So, one of the ways that Microsoft is trying to sort of streamline this process for people getting into these services is that there is one central service that's sort of deployed before others, and this is their AI services module. And essentially what this allows you to do is use one API key to then connect these different services here. So things like speech, vision, document intelligence, these all use that one key that you connect via your services here. And if you can sort of see in that screenshot here, that was the service that I set up for all my training here. This was just on my personal account. And as you can sort of see, you can then deploy some of those further services, and it's all linked through this one key here. And one of Microsoft's newest offerings, and this is super new, so new that it wasn't actually featured on the exam that I took, which came out in October, as this was sort of released in late November last year, is the Foundry. So the Foundry is a graphical user interface which makes it really easy to develop, evaluate, and deploy generative AI solutions. So this is using those models that I mentioned before, like OpenAI, things like DeepSeek. It seems like there's a new one that's really powerful that's coming out every week. Like even Alibaba released one very, very recently, Qwen. And so these are very, very quickly ported into The Foundry. So the Foundry is a really great place to sort of get started with these generative AI solutions, so really those language-based ones, but also gives connectors to those AI services that I've mentioned above in terms of things like vision, document intel, and speech here. So what I'm trying to say with this one is that Microsoft makes it really easy to get started with this. So if you're looking at those previous slides and thinking, hey, I don't really deal with these sort of services directly, or I'm not experienced with writing programs in Python or C Sharp, but I want to get started and understand what's actually happening behind the scenes here. Microsoft makes this really easy to get started with this concept of a studio. So for many of the different offerings, I've only mentioned 3 here, but there's a number of other studios that are available as well. What you can do is you can jump into these and it will provide basically a graphical user interface to understand what's going on behind the scenes. So you can sort of see both, that GUI view and then also the code view, what's going on behind the scenes. It will provide sample code on how to, perform exactly what the code is doing behind the scenes here, and it sort of presents that all through to you. So 3 really good examples of this to get started are the Speech Studio, the Language Studio, and the Document Intelligence Studio, and I've got a couple of screenshots here. So the Speech Studio makes it really easy to sort of understand the different offerings that you can use within speech, or a couple of the really useful ones. So there's a couple of examples there where you can either sort of analyze a speech, an audio file. They've got some pre-canned ones, or you can actually just upload your own and it can do it live. You'll sort of see the code that's required for you to implement into your C# or Python solution, or others. They're just the main the main ones that Microsoft trains you up on, but you could use these in many other ways, and also using the SDK as well to interact, or you could use your RESTful interactions there. So this one can interpret the intent. It can identify multiple speakers that are going on in one case. If you've got a phone call that you wanted to monitor, or a call like this, you can analyze the sentiment sentence by sentence, and then also understanding the language from these audio files, which would then be very easy to translate with the next tool that I'll be talking about, which is the Language Studio. So Language Studio is all about analyzing text in all its different forms. So this can give us really informative ways to sort of summarize this text, understand the entities that are being named within the text, and also translating that live. And then finally, there's the Document Intelligence Studio, which I had a lot of fun using. So essentially what this one does is you can, as I mentioned before, you can analyze those sort of widely used forms, like things like receipts or pay slips, tax forms and the like here. You could go in and use a pre-built model to go and understand those. Or one of the cool exercises that was sort of required and then tested on in the exam as well was sort of training your own model which understood custom forms. So as I mentioned before, I think that this is something that could be really useful to some of our clients here. And it's super simple to sort of get started with sort of labeling and you're saying, okay, here's where people's names go. Here's where the address goes, here's where the information I'm really interested in. And you could theoretically get that information out and send it straight to an index, send it straight to a database, and then start reporting on it with a tool like Power BI. So as I mentioned, these are only 3 of the studios that are available. I think they're 3 really accessible ones to get started with. If you want to have a play around with these, you will have to have one of those AI services keys that I mentioned in the previous slide here to get started. But all of these have a free or very, very cheap tier to get started as well. So the barrier to entry is really quite low. And this is sort of generally the case through a lot of these solutions here, is that there is, that ability to go with sort of the no-code solutions or the really low-code solutions. And I think that that's really key for business users. So for example, that first exercise that you run through, or the first couple of exercises that you run through in the Microsoft Learn materials, is identifying sort of very ubiquitous forms and doing it visually. And this is something that can be done with very, very little coding. The second exercise then is when you sort of are using a custom form and then you're visually mapping it out yourself. This is something that can be very easily done by a business user. But then if you sort of think, hey, we want to integrate this into our programming, we've got this pre-trained model and this might have been trained by a business user. Once that's validated, then like a solution architect would then go and build this into a web app, or using that model that had been trained by a business user to then go and automatically do their work going forward. So as you guys would have seen with Azure as well, it's sort of built at very different levels, and I think the studio level is a way to get familiarized. And also, if you're not maybe someone who's naturally a programmer or a naturally code centric, it's a good way to get started. I know that it really helped me in terms of jumping up the levels there and understanding what was going on before I got stuck into Python.
Yeah, I was just going to add one more thing, and again, opportunity-wise, digitization of old-school hard copy documents, as simple as that, even. If you think about, and you talked about the search engine that's so really good, which I've so happened to use as well, it is really super good, is that, where companies have got documents sitting in PDFs and all sorts of hard copy type formats, this thing here can be a simple use case of actually ingesting that data into a store where the search engine can then sort of offer its power, right? So yeah, lots of opportunities there.
I couldn't agree more. I think the only thing we need now is a robot to start feeding the documents into the scanner itself, and then we'll have an end-to-end solution, right?
Well, Tom, thank you very much, mate. That was really informative and a great presentation. So well done.
Thank you very much. I'll just leave you all with some, and I can paste these links into the chat as well. But if you're interested in getting started with sort of doing any of these elements, the Azure AI sort of page has got a lot more information and presented it much more nicely than I have in this presentation. I've put a link for the AI 102 Learn modules. This is what I completed. If you go through all of them, it's probably about 30 hours of actual work in there. So it's quite substantial. But if you're interested in one of the particular topics, so that vision, like object detection is important to you, or these sort of things here, go in and jump in there. The AI 102 study cram, there's a gentleman out of the UK who produces these sort of videos, which is sort of distilling all of the content in a short video. I really, really enjoy those, and it's about as much information I've seen crammed into 2 hours that I've ever seen before. So that's a really, really good one. And also gives some description about how to implement these sort of solutions in containers, and probably more talking about the nuts and bolts of building these solutions here. But then there's also the AI 900 certification to have a look at. So this one is the fundamentals level. So as many of you know, that the Microsoft certs have got a fundamentals, a associate, which is what Zeb and I have done in our respective fields, and then there's also an expert, which is sort of combining multiple different topics there as well. But the AI 900 cert is relatively short to study for. I've heard that people who are technically literate can sort of study for this one in a day or two and get started. So that might be something that you're interested in if you wanted to give this a bit of a go. But thanks again, everyone, for your time and for the opportunity to do the study for this course and complete it, because it's something I really enjoyed, even though I was fretting about it in the days immediately before the exam. So thank you very much, everybody.